Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I would like to welcome you to the Sunday Book Review. The Sunday Book Review is the series where I discuss books which impact the compliance practitioner, the legal professional, and the business professional. I hope you will enjoy this episode. The Sunday Book Review is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. Welcome to the Sunday Book Review for January 14, 2024, the Books on Morality edition. Rather than talking about ethics, I thought we might consider some books on morality for this episode. First up, The Morality of the Exterior Act in the Writings of St. Thomas Aquinas by Friar Chad A. Ripperger. This is a dictatorial dissertation by the Good Father, which covers the distinction in writings of St. Thomas between the object of the moral act, its natural species, and moral species. It covers how, in the mind of St. Thomas, one derives the moral content of the moral species and how one goes from the natural species of the moral act to the moral act which one chooses. A pretty deep subject, but also pretty interesting. Next up, Making Choices, Practical Wisdom for Everyday Moral Decision by Peter Kreeft. It's a moral jungle out there, says the author. In Making Choices, he describes why we find decision-making is so difficult and living with our choices even harder. With penetrating wisdom, humor, and common sense, the author draws a map through the everyday jungle of moral choices, one simple enough for the believer and convincing enough for the skeptic. The book clears a straight road through the thorny jungles of the skewered modern thinking about the way to live. Next up, Moral Psychology by Valerie Tiberius. Released in 2014 and updated, this was the first philosophical textbook in moral psychology, introducing a range of philosophical topics and debates, such as what is moral motivation? Do reasons for actions depend on desires? Is emotion or reason at the heart of the moral judgment? This second edition expands on these and adds a new chapter on evolutionary development and arguments for the innateness of morality. And next up, Modern Moral Philosophy from Grotius to Kant by Stephen Darwall. In this magisterial study, one of the leading moral philosophers refutes the charge that modern ethics is incoherent because it essentially depends on theological and religious assumptions that it cannot acknowledge. The author paints a panoramic picture starting with the 17th century thinker Grotius and tells the story continuously down to the time of Kant, exploring what in fact was a completely new way of doing ethics-based ideas on secular ideas on human psychology and universal accountability. The author shows how thinkers from Grotius to Kant are profoundly united by this modern approach, and it helped them create a theory of natural human rights that remains of great political and I would say business relevance today. The author further shows this new way of thinking provides conceptual resources that are far from exhausted, and the moral philosophy in this idiom still has a vibrant future going forward. I hope you'll read one or more of these books. That would be a great grounding for your work in the ethics and compliance arena going forward. So please check out one or more of these books or the entire list. I'd like to tell you about two new podcasts on the Compliance Podcast Network. The first is Adventures in Compliance. Yes, I am doing the entire Sherlock Holmes oeuvre of every short story and novel on the Compliance Podcast Network. We've gone through the adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and we are now in the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Join me in January for 31 days to a more effective compliance program where I give you a tip a day for your compliance program. Next, check out the award-winning Data-Driven Compliance, which is a podcast where I look at the use of data in compliance programs. This is perhaps the most cutting-edge podcast I have going right now, and if you're interested in how data can be used, how to structure a data analytics program, what tools are available out there for you, and how compliance practitioners are using data, this is certainly the podcast for you. Finally, if you have not done so, check out Two Gurus Talk Compliance, where every other week, Christy Grant Hart and I get together to talk about compliance and review Florida Man. The Sunday Book Review is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.